What do you think would happen if Gojo, the strongest jujutsu sorcerer that ever existed, became the vessel for Ryomen Sukuna, the king of curses? Would Gojo be able to suppress Sukuna like Itadori, or really succumb to its power and become evil? I mean, just think about all the possibilities. Well, there are 3 scenarios I had in mind. Scenario 1. If Gojo ate the fingers, what would happen to Itadori? Well, Itadori would not be dragged into the jujutsu world. He would remain oblivious to the fact that curses exist and would live out the rest of his days as a normal person with insane physical strength. Or, well, he would continue his superhuman normal life, I guess. Gojo, on the other hand, would still remain untouchable as intended. The incidents going further would always have Gojo involved since he would be the vessel for Sukuna, the king of curses. Gojo would be forced to work more since upon consuming the first finger, he would bear the responsibility of locating them and consuming them one by one. Gojo's role becomes more dynamic. He becomes a mentor for Megumi and Kugisaki, and at the same time the vessel for the king of curses. But what would be Gojo's motivation for consuming Sukuna's finger? Well, as the strongest sorcerer, I think he has an obligation to take on the tasks that benefit his title. And what is a more challenging task for the honored one than becoming the vessel of Sukuna and finding a way to get rid of the king of curses once and for all? I think this would be a good motivation for this scenario, proving to everyone that he can and will overcome the task. With his 6-Eyes ability and Limitless, he would have the biggest chance to suppress Sukuna. Although, some say Itadori was able to suppress Sukuna because of his physical capabilities. I think it goes way deeper than that. I think it has something to do with Itadori's willpower. You see, Itadori's desire to protect everyone overlaps his own desire to protect himself. This is first shown when he eats Sukuna's finger to save Megumi in episode 4. When he orders Megumi to save Kugisaki and leave him to face a special grade curse. Especially in the manga, there are a lot of moments where Itadori's selflessness is showcased. Now, why am I talking about this, you ask? Well, it's simple. The only way I see for Gojo to suppress Sukuna is by topping Itadori's willpower. But Gojo is not like Itadori. They are vastly different characters. Although he may be a self-centered character with a bit of a god complex, his being on the good side has never been cast into doubt. Gojo can be selfish at times, but one thing Gojo constantly has is his huge ego, like really huge. And that's what will allow him to suppress Sukuna. Gojo's ego and pride would never allow himself to become a puppet for Sukuna. We all know how rebellious Gojo is against the higher-ups, so I think it's safe to assume that Gojo's ego will allow him to ultimately control Sukuna. One more thing. Do you remember in episode 6 where Itadori fought Sukuna inside his body to create a binding vow? Well, if the same thing happened to Sukuna and Gojo, I would be willing to bet my money that regardless of the conditions, Gojo wouldn't allow it, and instead show Sukuna who is the boss. And the question is, if Gojo would be able to handle 20-finger Sukuna's power? Well, to put it bluntly, Itadori could handle 15-finger Sukuna with no sweat. And judging from Gojo's strength, I guess controlling 20-finger Sukuna would be a challenge, but I think he'll manage. To finish this scenario, I truly believe that if this were to happen, no one in their right mind would ever dare to stand up against Gojo. Normal Gojo alone is a monster, but if Gojo were to be successful in consuming all of Sukuna's fingers and suppressing him, Gojo might as well be the absolute god in his verse. On the offset, Gojo loses to Sukuna in a battle of wills, well, then everyone is a goner. The whole power balance and plot of JJK would not matter one bit. No one, and I repeat, no one, would be able to stand up against Sukuna if this happens. Not even Yuta Okutsu, or the Angel, which is Sukuna's main enemy. While it is true that Gojo himself stated that someday Yuta and some other characters would be able to surpass him, keep in mind that's just Gojo himself, not the Gojo possessed by Sukuna. With Sukuna gaining access to the 6-Eyes ability in Infinity, he would be unstoppable, as he now possesses the ultimate defense and the ultimate offense. Let me explain how bad the situation is for everyone in the verse. Here you have the king of curses, Ryomen Sukuna, possessing the body of the strongest sorcerer to ever exist in the JJK, Gojo Satoru. The combination of the two is too diabolical, and to say it's an overkill doesn't even begin to cover it. Gojo's technique Limitless along with the 6-Eyes already puts him above everyone else, and his ability to activate this technique at all times makes him invincible to any attacks directed at him. Now imagine all of Gojo's techniques amplified by Sukuna's powers. And then you get a being that is undefeatable in the entirety of the JJK verse. That's just Gojo's basic techniques. Don't forget he still has Infinite Void, one of the most insanely powerful domain expansions in the story. Oh, and let's not forget about red, blue, and purple. Now, add Sukuna, who also has his own insanely overpowered domain and techniques, gaining access to all, and I mean all of Gojo's abilities. But the only way for this to happen is if Gojo loses. though that won't be an easy task, so Sukuna would need to be more cunning rather than forcing himself to take over with sheer strength. He would need to outsmart Gojo and play the long game with him until Gojo lets his guard down, just like how Kenjaku was able to trap Gojo in the prison realm. And waiting for that moment won't be that hard, since Gojo is always letting his guard down because of the confidence he has in his abilities. Also, since this scenario is played out for Gojo to lose, well, it's basically game over for everyone. It's scary to think about what would happen to the JJK verse if a monster like that is introduced to the story. All of the JJK powerhouses would instantly try to get rid of his monstrosity, and ultimately all would fail. Even if Kenjaku and the cursed spirits worked with the sorcerers to get rid of him, it would never be enough. Not that Kenjaku would even do that. I think he'll just suck up to Sukuna like what he's currently doing now in the manga. So yeah, in conclusion, if Gojo loses in the Battle of Wills, the whole JJK is finished, right then and there. And not a single character present right now could hope to defeat that kind of abomination. But if you don't want Gojo to be taken over by Sukuna, leave a like. Wouldn't it be fun if Gojo and Sukuna worked together in conquering the world? No, that would not be fun at all. That would be terrifying and a horrible thing to happen. In this scenario, though we'll talk about what if Gojo fell towards the evil side, even when suppressed, we know Sukuna could still influence the vessel through their thoughts or by appearing out of nowhere in any of the host's body parts. Like how Itadori stated in the first episode that even though he can suppress Sukuna, he's still annoying inside his head. And in episode 24, Sukuna manifests his mouth on Itadori's palm to eat the fourth finger. Instances like this could happen to Gojo as well, so communication with him and Sukuna would be inevitable. So what would happen to Gojo? Through this, Sukuna would have the means to try and manipulate Gojo into falling to the dark side. I mean, even Gojo must have frustrations towards the world that Sukuna could somehow expose to influence Gojo to make hard decisions. Now, it wouldn't be impossible since Gojo's best friend also suffered from this and eventually decided to do something that's completely against the code that sorcerers live by. Gojo may be the strongest sorcerer, but that's exactly one of the saddest titles anyone could ever hope for.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Even though Gojo may seem happy all the time, he must sometimes feel the weight of all the things he needs to carry on his back to be the strongest in the verse. But back to the point, if Sukuna is successful in turning Gojo evil, well, the outcome would be the same as the second scenario with the powers granted by the Six Eyes ability. Gojo's limitless, his vast amounts of cursed energy, and also along with the amplification brought by him being Sukuna's vessel, he now becomes a being with immeasurable strength and potential. It is heavily implied that in the entirety of the JJK verse, aside from Sukuna, Gojo is unparalleled in terms of everything. He is a genius in his own right and has fully mastered his limitless technique to perfection. Not to mention his great adaptability in fights, showcasing just how proficient he is in all aspects of being a jujutsu sorcerer. All this, if applied in the wrong way or used for evil purposes, would leave the whole story of Jujutsu Kaisen in shambles. Gojo's power is not only limited to the jujutsu sorcerer world, he also plays a key role in protecting humanity from curses. If he were to turn evil, the safety of regular people could be compromised, leading to a potential increase in cursed spirit activity and danger for society at large. Gojo turning bad wouldn't just affect the jujutsu world or the regular people. Gojo has trained and mentored several students, such as Megumi Fushiguro, Kugisaki Nobara, Panda, Yuta Okotsu, Zenin Maki, and Inumaki Toge. If he became evil, his students would be faced with the moral dilemma of opposing their beloved teacher, leading to emotional and psychological challenges for them. It's important to note that the above points are purely speculative and based on my own opinions. The actual direction of the Jujutsu Kaisen series would depend on the creative decisions of its author, Jiji Akutami. So that's the answer to the question. What if Gojo became Sukuna's vessel? If you liked the video, make sure to subscribe and down below, comment your own theories.